Hi guys, welcome back. Today I am visiting Claudia in her hometown and it was a lot of fun. She showed me around her town and I got to see the sights and it was really fun, and we obviously are now sitting down to film some videos together. So I thought we could talk a bit about classics because we both really enjoy reading classics. Yes. And just maybe in general what our first contact was with classics, and maybe also talking about classics that we learned or studied in school, just because we both didn't go to school in an English-speaking country. Yes. So I thought that would be interesting. So I don't know, what was the first classic that you remember reading?
The first classic? So I went to school here in South Germany, and while we always had language lessons, I always learned French and English. The first classic was probably Die Räuber. No, that wasn't it. It was Michael Kohlhaas by Heinrich von Kleist. So this is a novella. I want to say 18th century.
Yeah.
Is it 18th century?
Yeah.
And I think we read that when I was about 11 or 12. And I remember nothing about it. I didn't read books in school. I was incredibly lazy. I was the worst student. I wouldn't have wanted to be my own teacher. And I just refused to read. Even though at home I was reading everything, as soon as it was set in class, I just didn't. So I remember that there are horses involved in that story. You read that at school as well, didn't you? Maybe you could say some more about it.
Yeah, I read it when, I don't know, maybe I was 16 or something, because I went to a school where I studied also German and French literature, so we also had German literature courses and we studied it there. And yeah, it's like a revenge story of a guy who sells horses, and things start getting really wrong in his life, and he also experiences some tragedy, and then he basically goes on a revenge against all the people who he thinks at least made all of this happen. And I actually I remember really enjoying it. And yeah, it's weird because I also obviously read some classics in school, but I only remember strongly classics that I read starting from when I was around 15, 16, because I feel like that's the time around which we started reading books more like in terms of themes and like literary context, historical context and stuff like that. I don't know if it was the same for you, like when you were younger, did you guys also read some like highbrow classic stuff?
Yeah, I think we started reading the German classics, the Schiller, the Goethe, fairly early on, but I'm not sure if there was much point in that, because as a 12 or 13-year-old, I don't care about a book that was written for adults in 1810 or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I wish that there had been some sort of, maybe some more age-appropriate classics, because they exist. You know, children's classics exist.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't interested in these kinds of stories when I was that age. I definitely became more interested, even after school, after I finished high school. I really started getting into classics. Before then, I just didn't enjoy them.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously you also said that you didn't really like reading classics just because people told you to.
Because I was a brat, yes.
I mean, you know, it's kind of understanding. I won't say that I read every single classics people told me to read. I mean, we also did in school, we did also some quite difficult French classics to read, like all this, basically also this 17th, 18th century stuff, all the plays by Molière, and it's really not easy French language. And like everyone, including me, we used to go and check some like plots on Wikipedia. Like I think everyone did that.
See, I was too stupid to even do that. I wish I'd done that. At least I would have known like the plot, and I didn't.
But then it doesn't help if the teacher is like, so what are the main themes or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like how classics are taught in school, I think is a general thing that is not great, and I
No.
don't think Germany and France are the only places that it is like this. I mean, we're talking about age appropriateness, and also just maybe themes that could be interesting to teenagers, right?
Because like what you said now about Michael Kohlhaas, that it's a story of a man seeking revenge, like that sounds really cool.
But
like,
not as a teenager.
You could sell that, but you could sell it to 13-year-old me if you put it like that. We didn't.
Maybe, yeah. I guess I feel like I don't know. I don't remember any moment where a teacher came and said, "Right, we're gonna study this book. It's broadly about blah blah blah," and making it really interesting and appealing. And I guess that's something that probably should be changed for students to want to be interested early on.
And then also not having this idea of the canon. And I know it's a big thing in English language literature, but I feel like it's even more restrictive in German literature. I don't know about French, where you have, the Holy Trinity. You've got your Schiller, Goethe, Lessing, and if you approach a book being told that this is one of the greatest works ever written in this language,
this is gonna help you.
Exactly. It doesn't make the book more interesting or easier to read. Is it the same in French?
I mean, there's some authors that are like praised, like in general. It's interesting that there's these 3 cornerstone ones in Germany, also because all 3 of them wrote in the
same 20 years.
It's like, why? I mean, I feel like in France, you have like the things like Molière and like Montaigne, so also people from like 1700s. And also you have, I think even more strongly, you have people like Victor Hugo and things like that. So I feel like it's mostly that century and 1700s, and I don't know why. And
so you go like 1700s and then late 19th century.
I don't know. But what I also feel in within the French like canon, I feel like what is also often really praised are like all these people from the 1700s and 1800s that wrote essays, like only wrote essays. And I feel like this whole philosophy and highbrow stuff, it's really grounded a lot within like this French literature canon, like people like
Enlightenment and stuff.
Totally.
Things.
Like, and I feel like this is also historical thing, just because because in France people make a big deal out of the French Revolution, and it's all about, this is where equality started and all the Enlightenment, blah blah blah. So I feel like this is even shown stronger, and it is also taught. And I had to read essays like this when I was like 14, and it was horrible. And it talked about things happening in the world that I was only starting to get acquainted with, like problems in the world and wars and all this stuff, and that stuff that you start understanding around that age, like when you're 11, 12, whatever, and it was so confusing. So it was more in this direction, like I feel like it went really full on, like the really complicated stuff, the really dense stuff that you could really not apply to your everyday life.
And you can't absorb as a teenager, especially because those authors are so far removed from our lives. I mean, first of all, they're all men. Like, I didn't read any women in school, did you?
Did I? No.
No, I didn't.
No, I didn't. And actually, in preparation of this video, just for fun, I went online and searched on the French Google a few of the like best books, like best French classics.
Okay.
All of them are by men up until maybe the 19th century, and then you have writers like Georges Sand and Colette, and they're pretty much the only women.
They're like, genuinely, if you ask me to name 2 French women writers, they're the ones, and otherwise I couldn't even name one. Like, no idea.
So I feel like in German literature it's also really strongly.
It's the same. It's exactly the same. Yeah. Never read any women. Never even talked about it as a topic. Like the big feminist classic we read, and I've just remembered it, is Effi Briest by Theodor Fontane. That was like, wow, this book has a female main character. Can you imagine?
And actually, there's like a counterpart to this book in French literature, and it's Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert.
Yeah.
And I read excerpts of this in school. It's a bit later, but it's like the same idea. Like it's in the head of a woman, like quite well-off woman. She's the wife of a doctor, and I mean, if I would read it now, I think I would really be appalled by what the author thinks is happening inside a woman's head, to be really honest.
Not much has changed.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think all of us might have a conflicting relationship with first getting into classics. But, I mean, we both got into classic and still enjoy reading classics now. And that, speaks for itself. And
I would say that's despite the school education. It definitely didn't help.
Yeah.
Although the one thing that I mentioned to you earlier as well, the one classic author I really got into in school was Oscar Wilde. But we never read any of his stuff in school. It just kind of happened. Actually, do you know how it happened? I was really bad in school. I never did anything. So I had to do extra work a lot. So for example, if I forgot to do my homework, my teacher would make me do like extra work, and I had to come before school and stuff like that. It's very common in Germany if you're lazy. And one of the things that he liked to set as extra work was translations, which is really tough, right?
That's so hard.
It's really harsh. And so he made me translate a part of Oscar Wilde's Salomé, actually, which is...
Oh, I love this. It's so good.
Right?
People don't talk about this enough.
No, it's definitely one of the more underrated works. Have you seen the operatic?
No.
Okay.
Oh my god, I love Salomé. I remember connecting with it so much when I read it.
The weird thing is, of course, it was written in French.
What?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes.
He wrote in French?
He wrote it in French. And
I
then
read it in French.
I'm going to fact check this. And if this is wrong, then you have to change this up to the but I'm pretty sure he wrote it in French, and then it was translated into English. But my teacher made me translate the English version into German. Anyway, that's how I got into Oscar Wilde, and that was the only classic I really finished reading in school. Pretty much all of his works, and otherwise, I probably wouldn't have read any English classics.
No.
I'm so gonna look this up with Salomé, but I think it's originally French.
It's if it's true, I'm mind blown, honestly. I mean, I also got into classics on my own, into English classics on my own, and also later into French and German classics that I actually enjoyed on my own. And I can't really pinpoint what happened, but I remember that the first English classic I read was Jane Eyre, but I read it in French. And that was because I watched a BBC adaptation of Jane Eyre. And I really loved it. I liked the atmosphere and the characters and everything. And I wasn't so sure of myself to start reading in English on my own. And that's why I read it in French first. And then I started getting into Jane Austen's novels. And they were challenging in English. You really had to get used to the writing style and the specific words. I obviously had to look up a lot of words. So that's how I got into English literature. And now I feel more sure of myself to actually look up the plots and look up what the themes are. Would this even interest me in the first place? And I feel like this is also something that is a problem when we're taught about classics, is that we're not taught, we're taught to see this as this big achievement, or it's this classic, so mystifying, blah blah blah. And it's not about, right, it's a story about this, would this interest me? It's just a book. You don't see them as characters and plots and all the other things that you look for in other literature. For some reason in classics it's they don't matter. But if I read a classic and I really hate the characters, then it doesn't matter if it's a masterpiece of literature. I'm still not going to enjoy it. I do find English classics more accessible if you're familiar with the language, because I think the form hasn't changed as much. If you read a Jane Austen novel, it feels familiar, it doesn't feel like something too strange. Whereas with German classics, it's harder to get into them. First of all, because there's fewer novels, a lot more plays, short stories, novellas and things like that. But also because the language has changed more in the past 200 years. English is more or less the same now as it was 200 years ago, whereas German, I feel has changed a lot. Totally agree. And I think it's the same with French language. Definitely, if you look from the 17th century to now, it's worlds apart. And words have just completely disappeared from general language. Or even more crazy is often in French, I feel you have older usages of a word, and if you read it nowadays, it means something completely different.
Yeah, I can imagine. In German, it's also with tenses. There are some like tenses that are used in written German, and I think it's the same with French, right? You have different tenses. You speak in a completely different way to how you write, and in English, it's kind of more on the same level.
Yeah.
So, did you read any other German classics other than Michael Kohlhaas?
The thing is, it's really hard to. I don't know why I have such a hard time remembering which ones I read. The thing is, I still do remember them. If I take the time to remember, I start remembering a lot, and I think that's a good sign. And I thankfully had a German teacher who was teaching very differently than my French teachers, and he was definitely going into themes and was making us also write creatively, which, you know, it's not something that is done really much in France. And so one play that I remember loving and that I reread recently and I still love is Der Besuch der Alten Dame by Friendrich
Dürrenmatt. I love that one.
It's amazing. Incidentally, it's also a vengeance story.
we read that in school as well. Actually, I would say that's what I would call the great feminist classic of German literature.
It's
funny.
Crazy. Well, I mean, it's from the 1960s.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it's
of course, different time. But it's it's fantastic.
It's so good.
Yeah. That's actually one that I would recommend to any. I feel like Dürrenmatt, I mean, yeah, he's a big name in German literature, but I don't hear English-speaking readers talk about him.
Well, he is Swiss, right?
Swiss, yes.
He is Swiss. He wrote in German, and yeah, he's not really talked about.
Not really talked about in the English-speaking world. His two great hits, Der Besuch der Alten Dame and Die Physiker, which is also fantastic if you haven't read it yet.
Haven't read it.
But Der Besuch der Alten Dame is absolutely hilarious and incredibly well written, and
also quite dark.
It is a play, isn't it? It's
a play, and it's funny, but also really dark.
Yeah, Die Physiker is the same. Like I would say that one's even darker. It starts off like absolutely hilarious, and then it's black humor at its finest. Yeah. If you think German's okay, he's Swiss. If you think German's not funny, read the Swiss guy.
Yeah.
It's very good, and the main character is an old lady, which is quite uncommon, and probably was even more uncommon back in the 60s.
Yeah. So as far as I remember, she comes back to her hometown in some really backwater town, and she's like really rich. She's built this empire. She had like 5 husbands or whatever, and she's coming back to this town with her latest husband, I guess. And she is basically seeking revenge for stuff that has happened to her in her younger days when she was in this town. And you start understanding what happened to her and all the people that have done her wrong. And it's just fantastic because you're more and more on her side.
Yeah.
And there's also a real build-up of tension because there's obviously an element of people searching for like this one person who is responsible, and then everyone starting being against this person, and there's this like horrible crowd dynamics, and it starts getting kind of violent.
It's so clever. It's such a cleverly written story, and it plays with this idea of power, you know, because this woman, old lady, not the most powerful kind of person, but because she is rich and confident, she owns the entire place.
She can literally buy anyone. She knows it.
So good,
it's so good.
I can't. I don't remember. Well, I don't know what the English translation is, if there is one.
I think I looked it up once, but I will definitely put it. I will all the things we mentioned. I will just put the English title translation if there is one, and but this one is definitely. It's also easy to read in German. Like if you have any small skills of German and you want to have a challenge for yourself. Or
find a translation.
A translation, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That reminds me actually of another old lady classic that we read in school.
Give me more old ladies.
That I recently reread, and it's called Das Fräulein von Scuderie.
Yes, I still have to read that one. Yes.
Yeah, and this is 18th century. I say no, it's not 18th century. It's 19th century. I read this as part of my 1818 project, I think. No, last year. It was published in 1819. And it is basically like all of the old lady detectives, but the original. So it's set in France, and it's set in the time of I don't know my French history.
One of the Louis, probably.
One of Louis, I want to say the 15.
Yeah, maybe.
17th century, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Phew. Yeah, and she's basically there, like this old lady, 70 years old, single, solving murders. It's quite fun.
It feels like it's like the best.
Yeah.
I really have to read
And
it.
I mean, like, you know, fair enough. That's not the typical story for a guy in 1819 to write.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it quite well. And that's the sort of thing that I did enjoy in school, even though I also didn't finish it because I was a brat. But if I hadn't been a brat, I would have enjoyed reading that because it's like a crime mystery. It's got a bit of action. It's got like jewelry theft and all sorts. It's good one. And it's very short. It's a novella.
Yeah. I mean, Hoffmann's most well-known work is Der Sandmann, right? Which is kind of horror,
super creepy,
folk
yeah.
tale. And I've heard so many good things about this one. Definitely have to read it. But how do you feel like the language is? Is it accessible or?
No.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier to read than your Schiller and your Goethe because it's a bit later and because it's not a play, right? In Goethe you always have these like forced rhymes and things like that. You don't have that in Hoffmann, but it is very antiquated language, very dense. Actually, it kind of reads like Kleist as well, I find, similar to his style.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's, yeah, E.T.A. Hoffmann is very, we call it like the Schwarzromantik, dark romantic era. It's very creepy. It's kind of our Edgar Allan Poe type thing. But yeah, recommend if you're into it.
Definitely will check him out, yeah. Have you read any French classics or like excerpts of French classics?
Yeah, we read one, and this was after 6 years of learning French in school, and we read L'Étranger by Albert Camus. I think it's called The Stranger in English, which is, was it 20s, 30s, 1920s, 1930s?
It's 20th century, yeah. It's the 1900s.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I don't remember any of it. I'm sure it's a great book. Yeah, someone gets shot on a beach is the beginning of it, right?
So
and it's set in Algeria.
Yeah, so Camus grew up in Algeria, in French-speaking Algeria, so he writes a lot about this. But I've never actually finished a book by him. So he's part of the existentialist movement, and he very much made his own stuff, and he wrote also a lot of philosophy work. And I never could really get on with him, to be honest. But I do think that it's really accessible, and a lot of people really love it. I never really finished it, to be honest. I know that it's, so the main character is, I think he's speaking from his own perspective, and he is casually mentioning that his mother died, and he's attending her funeral, but he doesn't really seem to care, and like that's where the story goes from there. I have never finished this book, but I did enjoy another book by him. It's called La Peste, and it's about like the plague. I guess it would be called like that in English, and that is, I think, a really interesting book because it also plays in Algeria, but it's in this town where rats start infecting people with the plague. So it's like as if the plague would come to modern times.
But it is like contemporary as previous time.
And it's played, I mean, he sets it in his own time. And it's a lot about how communities get together to face something like that. And now that I think of it, it's kind of horrible because of what we're going through now, but it's a lot about that and about loss and how do you cope with something that you can't really touch. I mean, you can't just stop it, you can't just catch every single rat that's going around.
Yeah, you can't do a Trump and just nuke it, like, yeah.
Exactly. So this is a really good one. I remember really enjoying that one. And
I've never heard of it.
I would say in general, like French classics from the 20th century are quite accessible, just obviously because of the language. I personally prefer Jean-Paul Sartre. I really enjoy his plays, and he has one play which I love, and it's called Huis Clos, but I don't remember how it's called in English, and it just means like confined in a closed space.
Okay.
And it's about these 4 people who are in this place that looks like a living room, and they don't know each other. And it's kind of a metaphor for like being in some sort of limbo, like we don't know if they're dead or not dead yet, and they all seem to be there because they've done something bad. And it's a bit like purgatory thing going on. And there's also some tensions building up because they're starting to learn about each other and what they have done, what the other person has done. And they start being scared of each other. And I remember really enjoying that one. So
that's like the most French kind of summary that I've ever heard of.
No, you say.
But also, I don't want to spoil or anything, but read Die Physiker. You'll like it if you like that sort of setup.
Read it. Yeah.
I did read, what's it called? Is it called The Hunchback of Notre Dame? I read that in a German translation, and I really loved it.
Me too.
And I read it as a teenager, like I think I read it when I was 13, 14, when I was like purposefully ignoring all the school books that were said. But I really loved that one. I read it in like a week, and it didn't feel like an old story. Do you know what I mean? Like it felt very modern, which I'm sure is partly also thanks to the translation. But it was great. Really loved that.
Yeah, I read it last year and I was also surprised. I thought I would give Victor Hugo... I like his poetry, but I thought, his novels are always so big. And I thought, let's try this one. And it's some things feel really modern, like also how they talk about the traveling community in Paris and how they are segregated. And there's so many topics that we can apply to today's lives in this book. Like... predatory behavior towards women and so many other things.
Yeah, it felt like a historical novel. I know it is a historical novel. It's not set in the 19th century, but it felt like something could have been written today, maybe with a bit too much description, because you always get that in classics.
Yeah, I mean, especially Hugo, he just loves to go on these tangents about some buildings and stuff.
Yeah, he does.
But you have to roll with it. You can just skim it, That's also a thing, like... A classic, like any other book, it's like not this sacred text that you have to inhale every single word.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't like a passage, just skip it, like any other book.
Exactly.
Anyway. Yeah, so I thought maybe we can finish the discussion by maybe talking about the next classics we are most excited about reading.
You start, because I'm still thinking.
I have this shelf where I put all my classics that I want to read. And I think I want to read some more French classics, and the English classic that I have on my first priority is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall.
Yes,
because it's been too long since I said I want to read it.
It's so good.
And I have found a channel. I will link it down below. I found a channel where someone talks about the themes of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and I want to read the book and watch these videos together so that I can really have the thematic theme.
You are thinking of...
Maybe it was a recommendation from you.
I know who you're talking about. She did a whole video series about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall.
Then probably you mentioned it in a video and I put it on my watch list, because I definitely want to watch these videos.
A Literary Jaunt is the name of the channel.
It might be. Anyway, it will be down below.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic analysis. Really, really good analysis of the entire book. But yeah, I loved it too. And it's another one that feels more modern than you think. I think it's more modern than Jane Eyre as well in terms of the style and the themes. It's incredible. It's such a good book. Yeah.
I mean, I'm really interested in reading it right now also because I just read a book by Émile Zola, L'Assommoir, which I absolutely loved, and it's about the alcoholism in the working class in Paris in the 19th century, and our main character is also a woman who lives within this milieu, and she has to deal with that personally, but also through the people she knows. And it had made such an impact on me, and I know that The Tenant of Wildfell Hall also deals with like abusive relationships and relationship to alcohol, so this is why I want to get to that one soon.
I think you'll really like it. I am currently, and I don't want this to turn like morbid or anything, but I'm currently reading a lot of dystopian fiction, especially 20th century dystopian fiction. So I'm going to pick some new 20th century dystopian fiction off my shelf. I really enjoyed reading The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. I don't know if you've read it.
I recently read, how is it called?
The Chrysalis.
The Cuckoos, the Midwich Cuckoos by him.
Oh right, is that also dystopian?
Yes, well kind of. It's also kind of H.G. Wells type sci-fi also.
Yeah, I'm just kind of in that sort of a mood. So I might read something by him or some other sort of mid-century, like 1950s dystopian fiction. There's a lot.
Yeah, actually, the next one I want to read by him is called The Kraken Wakes, and it's like it has this vibe of like climate change, like the sea levels rising and people having to deal with that. So,
wow, he wrote that like in the 50s, 60s, right? Yeah. That's just the mood I'm in at the moment.
But you really like E.M. Forster, right?
I do. I love. Yeah.
Then, if you read dystopian, you have to read A Machine Stops by him.
I have read that one.
You have read it?
Just this year, actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So it's very, very strange. It's very unlike E.M. Forster's other novels. But yeah, I'm planning to at some point do like a big video of 20th century dystopian fiction.
I think it's also one of the ones that's completely unknown.
Yeah.
Because it's so unusual for him to write like that.
And it's a short story, it's not a novel.
Yeah.
There you go. It's good to talk about non-English classics occasionally as well.
Yeah, that was kind of the plan, and yeah, I hope you guys also maybe got some recommendations from us, and if you want more recommendations or if you have questions about the books we talked about, you can write them in the comments down below.
If you have recommendations as well.
Also, of course, always. And just let us know what you're reading, for what classics you're reading. Are you participating in the challenge? And thank you for joining me. Thank you for showing me around today. And
it's okay, I'm glad you like it.
It was a lot of fun. And I hope you guys are reading great books, and I'll see you in my next video, or you'll see Claudia in her next video.
Bye.
Bye.
Das ist immer ein bisschen komisch. So, aber
jetzt müssen wir auf Englisch reden.
Oh, okay, ja. Das ist natürlich so umstellen. Ich glaube, ich habe in den letzten 3 Wochen Englisch verlernt.
Ach nee. Where was I? Ist okay, ich komme wieder drauf.